Ain't? Am I on?
You are.
Testing, testing.
You are.
Okay. I was born at a very early age in a little town near Pottsboro, Texas. It's about 8 miles west of where President what was his name? Eisenhower, that guy, was born. The records show he's from Kansas, but that's because he packed up and moved when he was 5 years old, left. But nonetheless, I was born in the old Tally Homestead house, which is now where the house was is underwater of Lake Texoma. So they moved the home from where it was. And last time I was in Texas, the old home was still standing. It had been moved about 5 miles to the other side of the road. But it was on the old Tally Homestead, which is now either underwater or part of the Hagerman Wildlife Refuge in Texas. Now, in that home I was born, and my older sister Laveda and Tommy, my brother, was born, as well as 3 of my cousins. I don't know if we all lived in the same little house or not, but that's where we were. And a brief history of how my father and mother met. My father's relatives are located in that part of North Texas when my great-grandfather moved there from Arkansas. He lived in a little place called Ash Flat, Arkansas. Well, he was a young dude, and he was a little on the rowdy side. Well, he got in a barroom brawl and got in a fight with this dude, and the other dude wound up with getting his ears separated. Well, that didn't go over well because he happened to be the son of the constable. So he's sitting in the jail, and the sheriff says, "You got 2 choices. You can go to jail or you can get out of town, and you better be out of town by tomorrow or you're going to jail." So he took all of the money he had in his pocket to the train station and said he wanted to buy a ticket to go west. And the guy said, "How far?" And he says, "How far will that get me?" And he said, "That'll get you to Sherman, Texas." Okay. So that's how they wound up in Texas. Refugees, you know. Well, the family settled around there. The Wilson family settled around there, and I had a uncle and an aunt lived there. A great uncle and a great aunt. And my grandfather was raised there. And so when my father, he worked as a youngster on a cattle drive. He would go down to Dallas, Fort Worth area, and they'd gather up all the cows and they'd drive them north to Kansas. The old Chisholm Trail, and it branched off to another trail. Well, the other branch trail that went to St. Louis went through that little town that the Wilsons happened to live in. So that's how they got there. Well, anyway, he was on a cattle drive, and it was over, so he's headed back and lived in the little town of Sadler with his aunt. Well, my mother just happened to be a school teacher in Sadler. So that's how they got hooked up. So that's how the Tallies and Wilsons came together. And I don't know,
What year did they get married?
1938, 30, Yeah, 30. I believe it's 38.
In
But
Texas.
In Texas, yeah, in a little town Pottsboro. That's in the documentary.
So the whole Dust Bowl thing was like in 1935.
Correct. Now, let's start with the Wilsons. The Wilsons started in Oklahoma, and my great grandfather came to California in the late 1800s and settled near Layton.
Okay, so they were in California way early on.
Yeah, but they had a habit of not staying still. And he worked for digging in the canals in Kings County. They lived in Layton, not in Layton. If you go to Layton now, down 12th Avenue, you cross over the Kings River Bridge, and the next intersection, they lived on that corner. Great big old house, because there was a bunch of them. Anyway, they were digging canals.
That was your great-grandfather.
My great-grandfather. And then, I don't know how long, he finally moved back to Oklahoma or somewhere. It's in here, but because they moved all over, it's hard to keep track of them. And my grandfather, with his kids, lived there. My father was born in Texas, but when he was 10 years old, living in Layton, I guess boys would be boys, his older brother Guy, which was about 15 years older than he was, they were out and Guy was messing around with a shotgun. Well, he shot my father in the lower left leg with a shotgun. So needless to say, that bled a little bit. Well, Guy got the worrying that he'd killed his little brother, so he runs all the way to town to Layton to get the doctor. Well, the doctor, he says, patched up, pulled out as many BBs as he could, and bandaged it up, and everything's fine, except I remember my father when I was a young kid. He could show you his left shin, and you could still see the BBs under the skin.
Yeah, that's funny.
But anyway, he made it. Well, let's see. Can I use my cheat sheet?
You can use your cheat sheet.
Well,
you're not being graded. It's fine.
Okay. My grandfather was born in Ash Flat, Arkansas in 1863.
So why did that was your grandfather?
No, yes, my grandfather.
Okay. So why did they go back and forth?
Well, okay, my grandfather, when he had 12 kids, 10 boys and 2 girls. There was a couple of them that died when they were younger, Harry, and anyway, the whole family. His kids, when they got to be old enough, he ran a harvesting business where he'd take a team of mules and the old harvester and he'd go all over the west side harvesting wheat, alfalfa, or whatever. And believe it or not, in those days they still harvested, they were growing safflower. Well, they would run that in western Kings County harvesting. So that's how they settled around Hanford. They moved all the way from Layton to Hanford. My grandfather, and he had 2 sisters. One sister, which we've lost track of, moved to Selma. She married and moved to Selma.
Okay.
And we don't know where she is. We haven't heard a trace of her. The other sister moved back to Oklahoma. So we kind of scattered over. So anyway, he was in the 1870 census shows him in Jackson County, Arkansas. And he married in 1887 to a lady named Ellen Rhodes. And his oldest son was born in Arkansas in 1888. Then Harry, his next son, was born in 1892 in Texas. And my father was born in White Rock, Texas in 1899.
And
Okay.
what was it? The town?
Uh, Whitewright, Texas.
White, right?
It's in Grayson County. It's west of Sherman.
Okay.
And on the June 1900 census, uh, shows the kids Guy, Harry, Louis, James, and Jess. And George, another brother, was born in 1906 in Layton, California. That's when they
Okay.
were lagoon incident. And we have a 1910 census showing them back in Lamar County, city of Paris, Texas, that's North Texas, east of Grayson County, about 50, 60 miles. And that was 1910. Well, his first daughter was born in Oklahoma in 1912. And then the next census shows them in Riverside County, 1920.
In Riverside.
Wow.
That's,
In the south.
yeah. And anyway, 1930 shows my grandfather back in Haskell County, Oklahoma.
So did you ever hear why they kept going back and forth?
Oh, there's a story goes out. Well, he was working Kings County with the. I need a napkin. He was working with his kids harvesting, and my grandmother Ellen developed tuberculosis, and that was while I was in Oklahoma, and the Oklahoma doctor said, "California's got drier air. It would be better if she had dry air."
Oh, okay.
Since in those days, if you had tuberculosis, you was more or less
Yeah.
left on your own. Well, they moved to California again. That's that would be why. See, he was in Oklahoma in 1912. So they somewhere between 1912, they moved. Well, his wife Ellen had the tuberculosis, and she spent some time in the hospital in Springville, near Porterville. And then the doctor said she needs drier air. So he moved his whole family and his harvesting business to Riverside County.
Oh, okay.
Uh,
Because that's by the desert.
yeah, it's right on the Arizona border, the Colorado River there. Well, she died in 1920 of tuberculosis, and she was buried in Blythe. But we have a record of where she was buried, but a highway went through and they had to move the cemetery. So when they moved the cemetery, they made the new plot and they plotted it all out. Well, the records got burned in the county courthouse fire.
Oh gosh.
So she's
So
somewhere
they're on
down there
that, yeah.
in Blythe. Well, anyway, at the funeral, this was in California, at the funeral, he had to pay a group to sing at her funeral. Well, that ticked him off pretty good. He said, in Oklahoma, I wouldn't have had to pay those jerks. They'd have done it for free.
Oh.
So he had his hat full of California. So back to
Oh.
Oklahoma they went.
Okay.
Okay, that's 1920. Well, when they got back there, the kids were getting grown up and scattered all over, and you can kind of follow them in the census where they went. But my father wound up in Pottsboro, and that's where we went. So from there, like I said, I was born with a whole house with my cousins. Well,
So, but that was in 42. So during the Dust Bowl time, your family was in Texas?
part of them were in Texas, part of them were still in California. Kind of split because, they didn't want to go back to Dust Bowl. They just stick around in California and wait for the relatives to show up.
Did you ever hear stories of the whole, like, dust storms and all that stuff?
Yeah, but where we were wasn't such a problem in North
Okay.
Texas. It was mostly in Oklahoma and the
In
plains.
the panhandle
But,
stuff? Yeah.
let's just say the Grapes of Wrath reads kind of like my family history.
Well, the book I read was about the whole Dust Bowl thing and the families going through all those dust storms, which, you know, she did a really good job of making them sound really awful. And them coming to California and, you know, in a pickup truck and going through the desert and having to drive all night so that didn't burn out your car and overheat and all that stuff. So when they went to California, did they just drive?
Yeah, they were in mostly Model A's, because you have the choice of a Model A or nothing. But they were notorious for getting hot and boiling over and flat tires. So the trip took over a week because you would drive and camp, camp. You kind of just lived out of that truck, and that's what some of my relatives did. But in my particular case, we were in Texas during that. And let's see, where was I at? Okay. I came to California when I was 2 years old.
Okay.
1940. Well, I was 1 or 2, because my younger brother Wendell was born in Hanford in 1944. Well, we lived in Hanford. At that time, we lived on a home furnished by my father's employer. He worked for Verberg, which Verberg still raises walnuts and all from Kings County. The ranch is still there. But my grandfather still lived in Texas, my mother's father. And he was about 77, and he had health problems, and he wanted to see his little Wilson kids one more time. So we moved back to Texas.
Okay.
And
So what do you remember about your first trip to California?
I remember nothing about it because I was 2 years old.
Okay.
It wasn't working good. We lived in California, like I said, until about 1945. We moved back to Texas.
Okay, so what do you remember about the war? Do you remember anything
Nope.
about like wartime?
No, because it was over when I was 4 years old.
Yeah, okay.
I didn't follow forward.
So your father didn't have to go into the army, or?
Well, he had, by 1940, he had 4 kids, so they were working their way up the list. And he got his draft notice after Wendell was born. That would be the 4th kid. They'd worked their way up. But before they could process it, the war was over.
Oh, okay. So he slipped. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's good.
Yeah.
That's the best way to be.
So anyway, we moved back to Texas, and then my father died in 1958, and leaving my mother with 5 little kids. And there's a story that goes with it that's kind of humorous when you look back at it. We moved to California out on 12th Avenue. The Cardoza Ranch he had a farm there, but it was a vacant house because he had another dairy on 10th Avenue. We were on 12th Avenue. Well, we found that home, and it was out in the country just right. And we didn't want to live in town. We wanted to live in the country. Well, so picture this. Here's a carload of people. The widow mother and her 5 kids. And my older sister had been married a couple of years. She married in Harlan in Texas. But he got transferred to Japan, so we came to California because my brother was going to college, and tuition was expensive back there, but here in Kings County he could go to junior college for next to nothing. So we decided to move to California because the wages were more. So my mother was working as a nurse. She could make about twice as much as she made in Texas. Well, we moved to 12th Avenue, but here's the widow woman with 5 kids. My sister was about 4 or 5 months pregnant. So they look over there, and here's a widow lady with a pregnant daughter and 4 other boys. So they would probably thought this is PWT moved in next door,
Oh, yeah.
which happened to be just south of where the Watsons lived. And then the Watsons was another group of Oklahoma kids, and there was, I don't know how many of those, 5 or 6. Anyway, that's how Tommy and Virginia got hooked up. And so
Okay.
I lived there on, I would have been on 12th Avenue, and I was going, let's back up and tell you where I went. My first grade, I went to Sherman Schools, a school named Washington, and that was 1947 and 48. Then, because the Texas politicians like to play with gerrymandering, the school district happened to be the voting district. Well, they'd redraw the lines to suit them. So the next year, I went to another school called Lee,
Oh, huh.
and they redrew the lines again. So anyway, then we moved to California, and I went to Armona Elementary School, and it was on 14th Avenue, and it was on the north side. Well, they were building a new school on the west side of the street. Well, I went to the north side, and then they tore the building down and had to go across the street. So that was the 4th grade.
So you never went to the same school twice?
Well, the 5th grade, I went back to Fairview
Oh.
in Texas. And the 7th and 8th grade, I went to Sherman Junior High School. Their junior high school was 7, 8, 9. Then high school was 10, 11, 12. Well, then I decided to, I went to junior high there. Then in 1957, I went to the Sherman High School. And we moved out while I was in the 11th grade. We moved January, so I was about halfway through. Then I went to Hanford High School for a year and a half. I graduated in 1960. And so that brings the score up that I had went to, before I graduated high school, I had went to 8 schools.
Wow. Let's go back to when your dad died. How old were you?
16.
Okay. So I had never heard that story about when he died, you actually found him from.
Yeah, it was February the 2nd. So it was typical Texas, North Texas, colder than a well digger's foot day. And I was taking driver's training at the time. So I was in studying my driver's trainer manual, and Tommy was doing something. And we heard my father drive up in his pickup from work. Well, he backed up to a fence, and had found some used bricks, about 100 of them. He piled them out by the fence. Went in the house. He goes in the back door. Tradition, he would go in the back door and wash up, comb his hair. He never ate a meal, but what, he didn't go wash his hands and face and comb his hair. Well, we hear him come in the back door, and we're just still minding our own business, and I heard a noise. Whoop. Oh, wonder what that was. Then it got quiet. So I walked around, and look, there he was laying in the bathroom floor. And he just fell over dead.
Wow.
And I found him. Called Tommy. Said, Tommy, we have something wrong with Pops. So then we called the ambulance, and you could tell by looking at the ambulance driver that they weren't in a hurry to get to the hospital because he passed away. Well, my mother was a nurse at the same hospital. So she met the ambulance, and she too said when she knew he was gone.
Wow.
So, that's something you'll never forget.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
That's not cool.
but that was in 1958, February.
Yeah.
Well, it's just about a year later that we moved to California because my mother couldn't take care of the place where she was, but she still owned it, and my grandfather lived there until we moved. And anyway, she sold the place, and she sold it lock, stock, and barrel, everything but the mineral rights. That was, oil well. Don't sell the oil well. Well, she sold it to some guy, and he's making payments. Well, sometimes he'd miss a few payments, and she'd have to put kibosh to him. Well, later, when she got Alzheimer's, she had forgot the part that he'd paid in makeup.
Oh,
Gosh.
And from then on, she wanted to go back there and repossess that property. And we kept saying, it's not ours anymore. He paid for it. No, he didn't. So, with Alzheimer's, when somebody's got it in their mind,
yeah.
you're not going to change their mind.
Absolutely.
Well, she kept insisting that people take her back to Texas so she could check on that. And nobody would. It was hard to find a volunteer to take her back to the reunion. She would always manage to make the Siebman, her mother's reunion family, to the point that when Rosalind was graduating from Fresno State, happened to be the same week, well, she chose a reunion over granddaughter's graduation. But that's the lowest she was. Well, when your mother and I, in a weak moment, volunteered to take her back to Texas, we stayed at my cousin, and her husband had a second home or cabin of some sort on Lake Texoma, just a little, 2 rooms, bedroom and a living room, and that was about it, kitchen. Well, we stayed there with my mom, because her sister lived in Pottsboro, which was 5 miles away. Well, all the time she's there, she wants to go to the courthouse and investigate that stuff. And we'd talk her out of it and get her busy doing something else and whatever. But she and my aunt, Clara, we called her Cracker Jack. We were all at Cracker Jack's house having lunch, and somebody referred to her as Cracker Jack. And she come all unraveled. My name is not Cracker Jack. My name is Clara. Okay, Aunt Clara.
I have never heard her referred to anything other than Cracker Jack.
Yeah, it was Clara.
She was always Cracker Jack.
Clara Lois. Well, anyway, we kept dodging the issue. Well, we go to the Siebman reunion, and it just so happens that one of the Siebman grandkids, great-grandkid or something, was an attorney.
Oh, gosh.
But he still had a Tally name. He was kin to the Siebman, but still a Tally. But he was a lawyer who was younger at this time, but he since then started a law firm in Dallas. Well, his law firm happened to be the one that represented Frito-Lay when they sued Procter & Gamble over Procter & Gamble called them Pringles potato chips.
Okay.
So that was one of his, and he won the case. Procter & Gamble had to call them Pringles instead of potato chips. Anyway, she hit him up, tell him the whole story. And he's polite and he's listening. I'll see what I can do. He said, no. Later, I came up to him and I said, she has a little memory problem. It's Alzheimer's. Is telling her. And he says, I had an aunt who had Alzheimer's. I know what the problem is. Don't worry about it. Okay. No charge for service.
Exactly.
Well, we finally managed to finish the trip and flew. We were getting ready to fly back. We had the 3 tickets from DFW to Fresno. That was a direct flight in those days. Well, I got word that there was a big Wilson reunion down just south of Dallas or Austin, Texas. And so my mother was just, she wouldn't have it any other way. She had to go to that Wilson reunion. Okie dokie. So I abandoned my chief mate here, and she flew back by herself. My mother and I went to the Wilson reunion, and it was, I think, about the closest kin was third cousin.
Oh yeah.
But they were very cordial, and one of the ladies that was at the reunion was doing family research, and she had a lot of history.
Oh, that's good.
She's the one that hooked me up with going back in history, because after my great-grandfather, I had no record of where they were from.
Mm-hmm.
Well, she'd filled it in,
That's cool.
because although she was married to my third cousin, they joined back and she filled in the family history. When you refer to it, it's a guy named Stephen Wilson. And anything past Stephen, there's a gap which makes it subject to speculation. Well, the best we can do, and there was a guy named, one of my distant relatives, a guy named Newman, Preston Earl Newman. He was an engineer by trade, and engineers, they have a thing for detail. He wrote a book about that thick of the relatives and what he had researched and where he got his information, and he did a good job, opened up a lot of things. But if that one gap was correct, and it seems to be correct to the best of his knowledge, then I was able to trace my Wilsons back to when they got off the boat from England.
Wow.
So that's how I got that one.
That's cool. So you needed to go to that reunion.
That was in the late 1600s, and they settled in Richmond County, Virginia. But it's Richmond County today, but then it was different. The lines were different. They split the state up because one of the areas was named after an England loyalist, was the name of that area where he lived. Well, when England got on the outs, they decided they didn't want his name, so they split the county up and renamed it. But it was on near the James River, just around the bend, and they owned big land, tobacco plantation, and I have a excerpt of the laws and regulations of those areas in Virginia, and the church was the thing. Everybody went to church. And they even had the law on the book that if you missed church, you needed to pay the pastor so many pounds of tobacco.
Oh gosh. That's funny.
And if you missed 30 days in a row, you had to pay a whole bunch of tobacco. They used tobacco as money.
It's currency.
Yeah.
So where am I at now?
I interrupted you when you were just meeting her.
Yeah, but I have a question. Your mother was teacher, and then she became a nurse. Tell us how that switch came about.
Yeah, she was a teacher, but when they got married, I don't know, she taught a little bit, but then they finally, moving back and forth, she quit teaching. Because this was, everybody was moving everywhere. Well, anyway,
But she had to go to school at some point.
she went to North Texas State Teachers College, which is, in those days, 2 years in college, you got your teacher credential. So that was that. Then she went later and had to go to school to become a registered or a licensed vocational nurse. She never was an RN, she was a licensed vocational nurse. And that's how she studied to become a nurse. And she was working as a nurse when we were living in Texas. That's why she was at the hospital when my father showed up. Then after he died, she came to California. She had to pass the California exam for the LVN, and she became a nurse. She worked at the Catholic hospital in Hanford,
That happens all the time.
and all the time we were in California. But anyway, back to the how it worked out great was we still had that oil well in Texas. Well, that was 1954. Was 54? It would be, no, 51, because I was 9 years old. Well, the well started pumping in 1951. And it was one summer, and I was riding my bicycle down the hill. Whee! Well, I hit a patch of gravel and it broke my elbow. And it moved it up, so I had to put me in traction for 10 days. I was in traction in a hospital for 10 days with arms sticking up.
Oh gosh.
That was fun. 10 days.
10 days, yeah.
Well, that month, my parents got the hospital for 10 days. Was a big old sum of $300.
Oh wow. That's probably a lot of money though.
And the oil check came in, which was a big old sum of $300.
It all worked out.
Easy come, easy go. But the well kept producing, and the arm got well. So it was a good, excellent source of income for my parents. And they, because my father worked as a carpenter's assistant. So he probably wasn't making about $1 an hour back to wages in those days. So, but we lived on that oil well. And that oil well still, since 1951, is producing gas, natural gas today.
Oh wow.
My last check was a little under $100 for 3 months.
Wow.
And my percent of that oil well is .003.
Wow.
So I want a lot of it, you know.
Yeah.
So you multiply that up, and that oil well still produces 10 grand a month in royalties.
Wow.
So they were going to go through and do fracking and get it pumping oil again, but then, as I call them, the environmental wackos said that wasn't working. Cost me money.
Yep.
Well, anyway, we lived on that, so we weren't poor by any means. We were not rich, but had a steady income, and my mother lived on that income from that oil well for the rest of her life.
Yeah. Well, that's probably really nice when
So
you're
it was-
widowed and
It was
have.
a whole lot
Lots
more
of
than Social
children.
Security.
But it was
Yeah.
really smart of her when she sold that land not to sell those rights.
Yeah, and that's what you do. You still don't sell it.
Yeah.
You never know when something's going to happen. So
Right. That was really smart.
If,
though.
if you buy property back anywhere there, you have to buy the property, the mineral rights separately. Or most people say, nope, I hold the mineral rights.
Yeah.
That means if I hold the mineral rights and Standard Oil holds the lease, they lease property from the mineral right owner. Well, in that mineral right contract, if Standard Oil or whomever wanted to drill an oil well, they could tell the guy that lived on the farm, we're going to drill an oil well over in that corner. Well, that's my cow pasture. Well, not anymore.
Wow.
So there's a lot of legal things going on.
Oh yeah.
I still have to pay property tax, and the mineral rights cost me $15 a year. Whoopee.
Yeah.
So I'm still making money, but not getting rich. But since when my mother passed away, there was 5 shares. So came time to pick up the shares. Well, I decided I'd just stick with one because you had to pay. My mother was on Medi-Cal. So Medi-Cal didn't want the mineral rights. They didn't want to mess with them. But if there were, so we were allowed to buy from whoever had legal claim. That was Medi-Cal, 5 shares. It was $900 a share, $4,500 for the whole caboodle. Well, I stuck with one at $900, and Tommy took 2, and Levada took 2, and Wendell and Dwayne said they didn't want to mess with it. But I paid off my $900, just about, almost got it paid off. So when I give up the ghost, you guys got to fight over that big thing. You owe Grayson County $7 a year in taxes, or you could.
I think I would for 7.
Yeah, I
That
think I
back.
can handle
But
that.
you know, it's you can say I own a Texas oil well.
Yeah,
Right.
there you go.
That
I'm an
counts as
oil baroness.
Yeah.
Okay, when my brothers and father decided to settle in Sherman, there was a doctor, Dr. Caraway, which was the family doctor, coincidentally happened to be the one that delivered all the Tally and Wilson and kids. And Dr. Caraway, as far as I know, he didn't have an office. He had a horse and buggy that he'd go around there. Or he would do most of the doctoring in the people's home. In the birthing and whatever. Well, he had 20 acres of bottomland down there on Post Oak Creek near Sherman. So he just said he'd sell them 20 acres. Well, they didn't want 20 acres of weeds. So they picked a little section that had 4 acres on it. Sold the other 16 to somebody else. Well, as I said, this 4 acres has 0 oil wells. Right across the fence, they drill a well. That's the one we got, because when they would drill a well, they draw a circle, which 20 acres inside the circle. And if your property happened to be somewhere in there, you got that percent. That's what we got. We got 1/20th of one or something like that. Well, on that 4 acres had 0 oil wells. On that 16, there's going to be 20 oil wells.
Wow.
And you figure 20 of them producing ought to have been one of them Texas oil burns. But I just missed it.
Keeps you humble.
Yep. And when we first came to California, or one time we came to California, not the first time, that was in the 40s, be 42, 43, no, 44, because I remember the trip, part of it. I remember riding on a train, one trip, just bits of it, particularly the one where it was coming across the Tehachapi grade and it did that loop where the train passed over itself. Hey, look at there, there's a train. Because passenger trains in those days were
Yeah.
big long trains. They had a lot of passengers. And one time we were coming in California, I guess that would be the last time that my father came. He had a 1946 Chevrolet pickup. Well, he had put, he invented the Winnebago. Put the cover on the back of that pickup, put a platform down where it would rest on the top of the bed. The bed was L-shaped, and it would rest on the top. Put a mattress on that, and the under kind is storage to put all our earthly belongings. Well, there's 5 kids. Only 2 little ones could stay up front. The other 3 had to lay down on the back and watch the country go by. And I said it must have been a picture, because you're going down the road and you got the end gate raised up, and here's 3 kids laying on the mattress looking out back. People drive up and said, look at that. There goes them Okies. But I said, my father didn't invent a Winnebago, but he forgot to patent that.
Yep. There you
Yeah.
Missed it again. And we came to California and we moved to, at that time, on the Verberg Ranch on 14th Avenue. And we would, father worked for the Verbergs. He got the rent free, and he made $90 a month.
go. Wow.
Big wages. You know. And so we would, to supplement it, the whole family, including the Riddles and whoever else we would all jump in the Winnebago, and Uncle Lawrence had a similar Winnebago. We'd drive to the west side over near Huron and pick cotton. And in those days, the farmer all had invented the cotton picker, or as my uncle used to call them, the red-headed Okie. Well, anyway, the red-headed Okies would pick the cotton, but the farmers still planted the cotton up within 5 feet of the road because they wanted to take every inch they could get. Well, the tractor couldn't, or the cotton picker couldn't turn around on the road. He had to turn around in the field, which would mean he would run over 20 feet of cotton. We would call was picking ends. We would pick 20 feet in. Picking ends. Well, we go to the west side over here on, and all the kids, and it's October, November, because cotton didn't start getting ripe until late September. Well, we couldn't start picking cotton until the dew had evaporated off the cotton. Had to be dry. So we get over there about 8:30, 9. If it's foggy, we'd have to wait till the fog lift and the sun come out. Well, here's all the kids playing. I was hoping the sun ever came out. But it always did.
But weren't you in school?
Huh?
Weren't you in school in
With
September and October?
this one on weekends.
Oh, okay.
Weekends. It was every Saturday we go pick cotton. Sunday, nope, nobody picked cotton.
Okay.
Sunday was the Lord's day.
Yeah. Well, that's good.
I'll stay home. Anyway, that was, we'd either pick cotton or we'd pick up walnuts on the Verberg Ranch. And picking up walnuts, you could make good money because they paid you by in this case, they paid you by the pound. Well, the Verbergs was a modern walnut place. They had a sheller, which would take that big green husk off. And because if you did work for the Verbergs, when you picked up walnuts, you had to break the shell off with you and just use the walnut. Well, when you do that, that walnut would permanently stain these
Yeah.
and break it because it just turned brown. Well, we didn't have to do that because we had the sheller. We still got paid by the pound, shell and all.
There you go.
We'd either picking grapes, picking walnuts, or picking cotton, or picking something.
Yeah.
And
So the book I read talked about people that picked cotton, the Okies, and it was like by Bakersfield.
yeah, let's just say about half of the Okies stopped in Bakersfield in Kern County because either they tired of traveling or the car broke down.
Yeah.
So a good push of them were in Bakersfield. Others moved all up through the San Joaquin Valley.
Yeah.
And since my family already had family in Kings County, that's where they went.
Yeah.
But-
It sounded like, from what you're saying and from what I read, that it was really lucky that you guys were already here,
Yes.
because it sounded like there was incredible discrimination against people who
Okies.
Okies that
Yeah,
came during the 30s when the Depression had already hit.
Let's just say when Steinbeck wrote his book, he didn't miss it far. He flowered it up a little bit, but it was true what went on.
Because it sounded like when you picked cotton that you were at the mercy of the grower. It talked about you would pick the cotton and they would give you, they said chit, which is like a token or something for what you, however much you, but then to cash it in, you could only cash it into the company store and they'd charge you 10% to cash it in.
Yeah.
But that was good nowhere else. So it was like they were automatically
But the
taking
same thing if you
10%
didn't
sold.
work. If you didn't work, you didn't get a token, but you still had the company store. And so you'd go buy a loaf of bread or
on
whatever.
credit
And so you were in debt to the company store.
for the whole year round.
You weren't allowed to quit till you paid your bill.
Right, and you weren't allowed to leave your cabin or whatever that on their land to go to other places to pick different crops during the rest of the year because they wanted you to be in debt to them.
Remember,
Sounds like modern day slavery.
Oh my gosh.
one of the country songs back there had words in it. St. Peter, don't you call me, 'cause I can't go. I owe my soul to the company store.
Well, I mean, really.
Tennessee Ernie Ford.
Yeah.
Gary listens to that song even now. That's why I know the words.
Yeah. But the book I read was like, oh my gosh. I mean, it was horrible to read all that. And,
Yeah,
you know.
when a coal carload of Okies had wound up in Kern County, particularly around Pixley, grew a lot of fruit in Tulare County. Well, they'd go fruit picking, and the farmer would say, "I'll pay so much, but that ain't enough. Take it or leave it. There'll be another wagon load in tomorrow."
Yeah.
Yeah.
But they deported all the Mexicans like around the beginning of the
Yeah.
Depression because they didn't want
They,
the Mexicans to take the Californians' jobs.
I wasn't
So-
there, but that's
Yeah.
I wouldn't put it past them because they were messing over the Okies and the Arkies, so they probably wouldn't hesitate
Yeah.
because, like I said, why should I pay you 10 cents a pound when the next carload will take a nickel?
Yeah. And the hospitals wouldn't treat the Okies in California because they weren't Californians, and so there was like zero help for anything.
There's a lot of historical photographs you can, in the National Archives, you can go through. And one of them was a picture of a home in Lamont near Bakersfield. And it's an old wooden shack with the screen door about to fall off and two boys peeping out. And the sign was rent, $2 a month. No water, no electricity.
Yeah.
So that was the good old days, weren't so good.
Wow.
Yeah, that was interesting. You should read that book. That book was horribly hard to read, but you should read that book.
Well, send me
Well-
the title.
Yeah.
The book, The Grapes of Wrath, is difficult to read until you grasp the idea of what Steinbeck was doing. He would write a chapter which was the overview of everybody in Oklahoma and Arkansas and what they went through. Then the next chapter would be a specific family, what they actually went through, named the Jodes.
Yeah.
Remember, Maul Jode, our famous saying, and we still use it, "I'm tired, I'm just tired." That's it. That's where it came from. But
Yeah.
it wasn't, so it was every other chapter. Chapter on the broad scale, chapter on the specific.
Makes me want to read it again.
And so if you remember what it, because it doesn't tell you that's what they're doing, it just
Right.
does it. You
Yeah.
say, now what's going on? But the Jodes were a typical family. They left Oklahoma because of the Dust Bowl. It was the Dust Bowl for them and in the book. But it was a tough life. But if you go to look at the history now, and this was 20, 30 years ago, somebody did a thing on it. The sons of the Okies, when they settled in California, call them, anyway, what'd they call them? The Dust Bowl, sons of the Dust Bowl. And it would read what the next generation had accomplished. You were in the higher class of the locals because they saw the value of an education because they learned the hard way. I learned the same thing on a smaller scale. I was working in my junior and senior year in Armona at a peach packing shed, Federal Fruit Company, and you had to use wooden boxes that weighed 40 pounds apiece. They'd pick those in the field. They'd bring them to the packing shed in a stack of 10 high. And I happened to be, just luck of the draw, got the highest paid job. I got $1.50 an hour. They held back 50 cents. If you made it through the complete season, you got that 50 cents in one lump sum. That was great. So
It'd
you
be
got
nice if that was legal now, huh? For me
Right.
to keep the cherry people.
Right?
yeah. Well, anyway, working in the peach packing shed, it's not a desirable place to work because peach fuzz can drive you crazy.
Yeah.
I got the job. It was called dumping. There was 5 of us. You'd have 2 guys, one with one hand, one with the other hand, lift that box off 10 high and set it down on the roller thing. And then that was 2. The middle guy would dump it, and these 2 would stack the empties. Well, we had the coolest spot in the house because it was right under a big old evaporative cooler. But it had the secondary effect of blowing all the peach fuzz out of that box. So you wore long sleeve shirts and buttoned up your collar, but it still drove you nuts. It was miserable. And the day would depend upon the season. It would start off, you would come in 2 o'clock and you'd work to 6. Then the season progressed, you just kept moving the clock. At the peak of the season, you started at 8 o'clock in the morning. You finished when you dumped that last box at 10 o'clock.
Yep.
It was fun, but you're covered with peach fuzz, and it's pretty soon you just get immune to it. And but whenever a lot of my friends worked there, and we had one of us was proud enough to own a car. He was our transportation. He'd take us and drop us off. But on the way home, there's a big canal. We stop at the canal, close and all. Oh, that feels good.
Yeah.
But that's how I did. But anyway, I worked there for 2 seasons, and after I'd graduated, I'm still working in the peach packing shed. A lot of the other guys that were working there, they point down them, and there was a grape packing place called Otoy Packing. They packed the grapes. And they'd say, Otoy's supposed to open next week. I'm going to go down and go to work. I said, Otoy can open next week without me because I'm going to college.
So that was your lesson working in the peaches. You know what you're not going to do for
Yeah.
the rest of your
I'm
life.
not going to do this the rest of my
So
life.
who owned the peach?
Huh?
What was the company? The peach company?
Federal Fruit.
Oh, Federal. That's right. You said that.
And they had a rail line right next to the packing house. They'd pull up this box car. In those days, they didn't have refrigerated box cars. They'd have huge blocks of ice in that car. And I don't know, just the ice kept it cool because it shipped it back east. But when that car pulled up, the packing house had rights to some of that ice. They'd go and get a big old block of ice, and just about 5 feet from where we worked was a big old wooden door in the floor and a big old metal tank in the bottom. They had curly pipe in it and full of water. They'd get one of those big hunks of ice and put it in there. So when you got a drink, it was ice cold.
Oh, that's interesting.
And a little kid would run a snack stand of sorts. He'd sell candy bars and soda pop. And all he'd do is he was RC and knee high. So you go have your knee high and a package of peanuts and call out a snack, you know. Because you're 8 to 10, you got to have something.
Yeah, you're burning plenty of calories.
But that had the education in it. And
Yeah.
you'd pass these people in the fields working in the cotton. And that makes my back hurt looking over there.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, well,
There's-
that's good.
So I'm thinking that good hard work has got a lot of lessons in it,
Yeah. Yeah, that's true.
life lessons. Well,
Yeah.
where are we at in history?
You were at.
Should we take a break for a second?
Sure. We'll turn this off.
Okay.
I need a beer.
Yeah.